Do and yeah. All right. Welcome everybody. It's good to have you on. I'm sure we'll have a few more people logging on as we get going. Pero para empezar, aquí les va in the chat on Zoom. You are now going to see tonight's handout. We'll obviously be going over the slide deck in the presentation, but welcome. For those of you joining in on whether that be Instagram Live or on YouTube Live, thank you for joining in. This is what we call a professional development seminar as part of the Poet Artist Development Program. Obviously, the professional development seminars are open to everyone. The Poet Artist Development Program in particular is those of you logged on Zoom. Y'all are going to get the benefit of having follow-up sessions if you want to ask questions after the fact. Pero por lo mientras, for those of you that are joining in on Instagram Live or YouTube Live, you can use your chat feature now to ask questions as we go through. Tonight's session is called Design Thinking. And in this particular working artist seminar or professional development seminar, we're going to be covering some things that on a certain level are more philosophical when it comes to the way you develop your business, the way you develop your brand. But there's also some very practical things here that you would probably want to consider as an artist, whether that be an artist that publishes magazines, zines, books, etc., or an artist that develops, programming for the community, or even if you're doing other types of projects that involve the development of, physical objects and things that people have an opportunity to interact with. Pero para empezar, I'm going to do a quick overview of last month's professional development seminar, where we talked about marketing and self-promotion. And these were, again, some of the key points that we talked about. The difference between marketing and self-promotion can be, sometimes, obvious. In other cases, it might not be so obvious, but generally speaking, marketing is the use of tools that can include things like your email newsletters, ads, word of mouth, and of course, social media. That's what we generally would call marketing. Self-promotion, however, is the crafted story that you put together to tell the story of your brand. And that, of course, is going to reflect your personal values and your personal beliefs, your brand's values and goals. Sometimes they might overlap, sometimes they may be slightly different. And it's also going to be all about a deeper understanding of your audience, how you connect with your audience. That's where social media kind of plays a larger role. Does anyone have anything that they want to, add that they remember from last month's social, sorry, professional development seminar? And if not, maybe the next slide might jog your memory. In this slide here, remember we covered the major social media platforms. And one of the things that I think we all could really agree on last month was that video is king. Pretty much across all of the different platforms, video posts are the ones that get the most views. And of course, TikTok is the current trendy social media of the day. And people spend almost an hour and a half a day, a little bit more than that, actually, on average, using that particular platform. Any other things that I might be glossing over, or anything that maybe Abraham or Angie would like to add?
Oh, I was waiting for Angie. She's the social media with the alerts.
You can go first.
Well, I think that the main thing is knowing where your audience is, because as you can see, like different platforms have different people that like check them out, like age-wise, sex-wise, and sometimes just it's stuff that they're looking for, right? So you have to really apply and see what you're offering and what's you're gonna be your audience, right?
Right. Yeah. Anything else or anything that any of you in the program now have like really been thinking about over the past month after this seminar? Angie?
I just would just say I definitely agree with Abraham. Um, like especially when it's like creating content, you have to like know your audience to see like, okay, what exactly was the thing that got the most views, got the most responses, reactions. Um, and that's basically just like the success of it. Um, Along with a few other things, but yeah, that's just my opinion.
Right. And then Jamie added in the chat, yeah, and focusing on one social media, usually the best, right? Build your platform on one of the platforms, right? It's always going to be easier to focus on developing your audience in one platform and then expanding as opposed to trying to do every single one all at the same time. In general, for us, it has been more Instagram than it has Facebook, TikTok, etc. Instagram is generally speaking the one that a lot of people are on that feels, most connected to what we do. For a while, it was also Twitter, because of being a literary arts organization, but Twitter has definitely not been surfacing content that is around literature and art and that kind of thing. And yeah, like Jamie said, it is a community. Each one of them is a community with their own kind of vibe, and it's good for you to be aware of the vibe that works best for you. And also, what type of content works best for you. Some people are, more comfortable with photos as opposed to videos. Some people are more, you know, open to having the like selfie video style of TikTok as their primary way of delivering content. And, that's fine. If that works for you and your personality, then take advantage of that, right? It's all about recognizing your skills, well, especially when it comes to using social media as a way to market your work. It's of course not the only way to market your work, but you know, for this day and age, it's kind of like, one of the most necessary things. So I think that's enough of a review from last month or this month. Let's talk about and I'm probably not going to say this name correctly, but I believe it's Ise Bursel, who is a designer, author, and co-founder of Bursel and Sec, a human-centered design and innovation studio. Let's discuss this quote. As you can see, the quote says, to say that something is designed means it has intentions that go beyond its function. Otherwise, it's just planning. What does this particular quote say to you? Is there anything about the quote that rings true in your mind, in your eyes? Or any key words that might pop out at you?
Luis, I have, this is Dr. Rosie.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
The line where it says designed means it has intentions.
Mhm.
So that stood out to me. And otherwise it's just planning or just kind of like you're not really moving forward.
Mhm.
But design means it has the intentions to me is whatever we do that we're going to put value to it, we have to do it with an intention.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like others in the chat agree. Erica wrote in the chat, doing everything with intention. Eric wrote, like the everyday use of things needs human interactions. Otherwise, there might be no point. And Jamie added, planning equals not a lot of heart going into it versus designing equals creating something that is going to make an impact. Yeah, acting with intention. In some ways, we can obviously say that this is a personal philosophy. We'll also see it applied in other ways. But Abraham, you have something you want to add?
Yeah, it's I think one of the big my main examples for design is like I always look for things that have like three things, right? Like it's like affordable, does it do its thing, and the last one is was a factor X.
Mm.
And what I mean a factor X is something that makes you feel other than I'm just driving. That's what I know getting a Tesla. It's you have an attachment either to your bicycle or to your car. They become more than a device that's going to take you to point A to point B. They have something that you get sentimental about, or that you have more than just the thing that's going to take you somewhere, right? You have memories, you have the sense of style, right? So it's something that's beyond its function. It has to arise something other than sometimes it's just a human touch, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad that you said, what the quote says, right? It does indicate that it goes beyond its primary purpose, right? It goes beyond its function, right? When you design something, you want to do it in a way that meets a few different standards for a few different reasons. Otherwise, kind of like Jamie said, right? If it's just planning, then there's no heart. There's more like a sense of it being there to serve a purpose, but it has no purpose beyond that one simple purpose. I think Abraham says it very well in that, we associate our purchases, if we think of it in that way, with, the functionality and what we get beyond the functionality. Um, you know, that's going to be something that shows intention, right? Apple, for example, is what's considered a premium brand. And it's not just that you own an iPhone, it's that you have, an iPhone. It has that like added air of premiumness to it. Um, or whatever the case might be. It could be a bicycle, right? A vintage bicycle, a particular style of bicycle that can also be designed in a way that goes well beyond its function as a bicycle. So, what is design thinking, right? What is it if we were to define it? In a basic sense, design thinking is a process for creative problem solving. A little bit more specifically, design thinking is one, a human-centered, non-linear problem-solving process. And the result of that is that it helps you meet the needs of your customers, users, and or audience. So here are some of the keywords that we want to focus on. Right? It's human-centered, it's also non-linear, and it helps you meet the needs of your audience. Right? Design thinking is a process. This is not something that will happen just immediately. This is something that does take time and practice. If you're not familiar with the basic concepts of design, and part of the reason why it's a process is because it helps you attack it from multiple directions. Now, there's a lot of different ways in which people might talk about design theory or design thinking specifically. There's multiple steps that different ways, or I'm sorry, that different people have kind of described it. We're going to look at it in a slightly more simplified way. Like I said, this is something that can be a little on the philosophical side, but in even this reduced way, it can help you think about how you approach your program development if you're going to be creating workshops in the future. This also helps you think about how you're going to develop your artist projects, as we talked about in one of our past professional development seminars. Now, the way that the kind of toned down version of design thinking works is that you focus on three overlapping concepts. The first one being desirability. And when talking about desirability, you basically are asking yourself this question: what makes a solution desirable from a human point of view? And this might be applied as you think about maybe building a website or building your logos. And like I said, how you might construct a zine or a book or, any other type of art interaction, right? This can be things that include color, right? Your color choices, your font choices, the way you lay out your text. It could also be based on things like the way that people interact with it, right? Desirability is going to be also about availability and accessibility and the ease of these things. If something is going to be too hard or too difficult to access, then it's going to reduce its desirability. The second overlapping concept that you would want to consider is the feasibility of something. And feasibility isn't just necessarily about technology, it has, I think, more like it can be about the resources that you have available to you, but at its core, it is about the technologies that are available to you and what is realistically achievable based on your skills. So with this one, if we remember when we talked about thinking as a business owner, this is where your assets, needs, and skills assessments really come into play. If you have taken the time to really assess for yourself what type of assets you have available to you, what type of needs you have in terms of developing your business, your brand, those are going to be things that you can then use to determine whether something is achievable, realistically achievable. All right. And of course, that also is going to be based on the availability of certain tools and technology. And as we kind of talked about, I think it was last week, right? There are a lot of resources, especially at the LA Public Library, where you can go and have access to tools and technology for free. So, there's going to be a little bit of assessing that you'll need to do that goes beyond just what you can realistically accomplish. It's going to be also about like, how are you going to be, accessing these technologies that you might need, which does overlap a lot with the concept of viability. When something is viable, that means that it is fundable and that you have other resources to achieve it. It's about being cost effective and sustainable. So this is very, very related to you developing a budget and thinking about your time. If something is going to be easy for you to produce and deliver, then it's going to be viable. That is, in a nutshell, what viability is about. It's about the management of your specifically time and your money. And if it's going to make it easy for you to, reproduce the content, whatever that might be. Any questions so far? Or any thoughts on any one of these things? Yes, Abraham?
I think another way of saying viability, it's also like how many times can you continue doing this? Is it profitable? Is it sustaining yourself and the product that
Yeah.
you're offering? Otherwise, you're putting all this work into something that's not gonna give back.
Mhm.
And sometimes you can say, okay, I give him like my time, it's okay. But again, you have to make that consideration. Are you gonna be able to recover your time and your resources out of it? Sometimes it's okay. You want to invest on in like a goal or it's your personal project. That's fine, but you have to put that in consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Sustainability is a very real thing. Any business that continues to produce a product or a service has to be sustainable. Otherwise, they're going to go bankrupt and ultimately close. And we see it happen a lot. I mean, if you want to start a restaurant as an example, restaurants are incredibly difficult to start because at first they might not be sustainable. It takes time to build an audience, it takes time to build a community. So ultimately, viability is about how well you can really manage your time and resources and ultimately achieve sustainability, as Abraham points out. Now, for those of you that are a little bit more visual, this is another way of thinking about these three concepts. Yes, Carolyn? You have a hand up?
Yeah, I was just thinking about like the balance of these three things and thinking about, I make merch with my partner for the music and, sometimes we have been left with like merch for like, t-shirts or something for longer than we'd like. And
Mhm.
it's like, you're wanting to hit the desirability, like, oh, people like this one shirt, but like, I'm not going to make it for the next 10 years, and just have like a back stock or, closet full of these shirts. That's not like sustainable. So it's like this balance between the desirability of like doing a limited run of a shirt. So
Mhm.
hope you sell out of it. And then you're also, wanting to be sustainable within that, like not just like making shirts just to make them. So yeah,
Yeah.
just a thought that this is making me think.
Yeah, we have a same conversation with Luis and Angie and stocking and all these products that we were thinking of having or selling, and always think about that specific conundrum, like it's how much should I get, or this other ways to approach it. We were thinking also like, well, e-sales, right? And just send those as a run and that's it, or having some type of like you know uh, asking people around, would you buy it, or it's something to make sure end up with overstock, right? So it's definitely good that you already have seen these and you're already thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think of like doing like pre-sales or something like that, like, put the money down now before I start like printing out these shirts. And then it's like, oh wow, 100 people want this shirt. Okay, I'm gonna at least make 100 and then maybe do 150.
Mhm.
Those are things to think about too.
Right. And, in a lot of ways, that's how this Venn diagram is meant to be read, right? You think about desirability. You have 100 people that are interested in purchasing a shirt. And in terms of feasibility, you have obviously the skills to create the shirt. There's technology available for you to do print on demand. There's technology available for you to take pre-sales, that type of thing. And then when you look at the viability of it, is it going to be sustainable to do maybe 150? Maybe, because you have, access to all of the things here and you have the desirability. Therefore, your solution is printing 150 shirts, you know, fulfilling the pre-orders and then selling another 50 at an event. So that's how really this Venn diagram is at least meant to help you think about product development, but also, this is something that can be applied to like graphic design work. If you're going to be creating a website or a logo, all of these things do play a role in that. Turn this into a shirt design? That's not a bad idea. I'll take pre-orders now. So, yeah, thank you for your insights, Carolyn, especially, with your actual applied knowledge of this. Now, I'm going to throw it back to you, all of you. What is design thinking? All right. How would you now, having learned in a very brief crash course, little slide deck, how would you characterize, we'll say, design thinking? Does anyone have any questions about it?
I guess maybe it's
Mhm.
not a question, but like a thought, because I know I saw something that you had shown in the slide about like thinking about your audience, but like
Yeah.
for me, I like to think about myself first and foremost.
Mhm.
Like if I'm not happy with the product or if like I wouldn't buy it or am I enjoying what I'm creating? I
Mhm.
guess like what are your thoughts on like yes, you're thinking about your audience. It could be about like, oh, I'm writing these songs, but like I'm writing them because I'm expressing myself, or I'm taking these photos because I'm expressing myself. And then like, when does the audience come into play? Do you feel like it's once you have, 100 people that are like, oh, listening to you or, liking what you're posting? Um,
Mhm.
so just like thinking about that yourself in comparison to the audience.
Yeah, I think, the relationship that we have as creators with our audience, it might be based on a lot of different things, and we did talk about before the concept of self-promotion and how it's going to be really about your personal story. That's ultimately the reason why people will come and admire your work. Design thinking takes that and almost develops it in a way that creates access for other people. So in design thinking, if you were to apply this to, say, a song, or better yet, one of your photographs, it's going to be about, again, accessibility to people, right? Because the artwork is going to be beautiful. That's art is relative. Art is something that, every person will find beauty in it, right? In some form or another. If it's a negative reaction, then there's still obviously a reaction. So we can't expect artwork that we create to hit with everybody in the same way. But the way in which you create accessibility for it, that is where the design thinking comes in. If you are doing a snippet of it on Instagram, right? A snippet of a photo, or if you're creating like one of those tile posts that I've seen people do on Instagram, where it reveals the photo in sections. That's one way in which you create accessibility, you create interaction, and you then ultimately capitalize on, hopefully, the sale of the monograph, for example, where that photo is going to be collected. So design thinking is about really extending out your solution for creating, that connection with the audience. Abraham?
Well, first, Dr. Rossi put that scientific equals an explosion of one's creative, artistic mind.
Yeah.
And then we have Erickson turning lemonade into
An
inhalable
inhalable gas.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's going for a song. And just to go back to Caroline, I think it's like the way we're talking about the graphs and all this stuff. I know it sounds a little, like methodical and like, we have it our graphs and all stuff. But at the end of the day, is that a specific thing? It's like how much are you willing to give? How much are you willing to pull back? How much of it? It's never a certain amount of percentage. Because remember, Van Gogh didn't really sell. I think he only sold one painting, right? So still he did his thing, and result of it, not a lot of success of his life. So it
Mhm.
is always gonna be like how much you're willing to give to the audience, knowing what they want. And of course, you can go ahead and do your own thing and expect people to like it. That's fine. It can land a hit. It's people like authenticity, but still you have to keep that in mind. Like you were saying, it's not a real easy balance, right? Like how much I want to do my thing without considering the rest. Like we're talking about the shirts. Maybe I love the shirt, but nobody else likes it. So I have to think, okay, I'm doing something that they don't like. Maybe let's switch it so I like it and they like it, or maybe I don't like it as much. But so it's again how much of it's gonna be you taking that much of time without the returns. Because you can go ahead and print as many shirts and it's fine. But again, you have to have that balance.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that, it's especially when it comes to artwork, it's going to be primarily focused on what the larger product is that you are selling, right? The product may be more of an esoterical concept, it's your artwork, it's a social practice, it's, community focused. And so if it's representative of a community, people are going to connect with it that way. But again, the design thinking element that we're discussing here is more about how you're creating the accessibility for your audience and how you, as the individual creating it, are going to be able to sustain it, and also, understanding like the technical requirements on your part that either you need to get through a third party, like if you have to hire someone, or if you're able to do it yourself, right? Like kind of evaluating where you can grow as an individual and grow, I guess, in tandem with your audience. Does that kind of help clarify, or at least answer part of your question, Carolyn? I mean, I do have to admit, like the way that we're talking about design thinking is a bit on the philosophical side, but we'll get into some of the practical sides of this too. And yeah, so Carolyn elaborated, design thinking starts with the relationship with you and your audience. Oh, they like what you are producing. Okay, I have an idea on how to sell them my art. Let me create something they can buy, a print book or shirt. Yeah. Yeah. That's basically what it comes down to. So very good question though, because I mean, these are the types of questions that we're going to have when we're ultimately developing whatever product we want to provide to our community, or service, because this does also apply to services. Now, how do we benefit from design thinking? You know, if we use these tools that we're learning, and going back to the Venn diagram, you know, how do we benefit from considering feasibility, desirability, and we'll call it sustainability or viability? You know, how do we benefit from that? Well, you know, the short answer is innovation. Now, the long answer is that, you know, design thinking, because it's an ideology that asserts a hands-on, user-centric approach to problem solving, it will lead to innovation, and innovation itself can lead to differentiation and a competitive advantage. You know, Apple, again, going back to the company Apple as an example, they're usually late to whatever technological, you know, innovations, quote unquote, are coming out, right? They're not the first ones to have smartphones. They're not the first ones to have VR headsets. They're not even the first ones to have an MP3 player, a portable MP3 player. But because they took their time and they used the design thinking principles and they went with the user-centric approach to their problem solving, that's why they became so popular with their products. You know, the iPod totally changed the way that people thought of MP3s and carrying around digital music. The iPhone, same thing. After the iPhone was introduced, you no longer really had the physical keyboards. You no longer really had the, you know, open source. I mean, you still do, obviously, in Android, but you didn't really have this like fragmented system for downloading apps and things. You know, a lot of people have followed Apple's lead because they used a human-centered approach to their designing and to their branding and to their accessibility on their website, and you know, just a lot of different areas of their business. They are good at branding, but it goes beyond just the branding. And it's that differentiation that gave them that advantage over other companies. We're going to play a very quick game. And for that, you know, again, you don't have to necessarily turn on your cameras, but I am going to show you two distinct projects. And I might have shown these before, but this one, Cienfuegos, it's a little mini zine. And then this one, Path to Poetry, Sendero a la Poesía, another little mini zine. Both of these were created by me. This one is, at its core, a single sheet of paper folded with a cut right down the middle. This is what we call a snake accordion fold. Right. This one, essentially the same thing, just larger. This also uses the same snake accordion fold, but this one has two cuts and two different types of folds. Yeah, a little complicated there to show. But my question for you is, which one of these do you think was cheaper to make? You can put your answer in the chat, or you can just shout it out. The first one, Cienfuegos. The bigger one was easier to make, or sorry, cheaper to make. The larger one was okay.
The larger.
The larger one, okay. The white one because of the color.
Yep.
All right. Got most people answer there. Show you again. All right. Here's Cienfuegos. Again, single sheet of paper, black and white, no color, single cut.
It's the material that you used.
The material, I should have mentioned that. Thank you for asking, Dr. Rosie. This one is a thicker, heavier stock paper. It's also larger. This is an 11 by 17-inch sheet of paper. Two folds, two distinct cuts.
And the other one's a thinner.
Yeah, the other one is
quality?
just basic printer paper.
Oh, well, then that's cheaper.
This one's cheaper.
Yep.
All right. Like I said, I got most of the answers. So I will go ahead and say that yes, this one, the one that is white, this one was more expensive. It's larger, it's more complicated. It is also I mean, just a thicker stock, right? And this is a single sheet of paper cut, folded in half, done by hand. This one was done by a professional printer using professional equipment. This one I printed at Office Depot, just making copies on their copy machine. So good job, guys. You all did well on that one. Next one. This is one of our most recent issues of Conchas y Café zine. It's got a photo here by Abraham. The interior is black and white. Oh, I'm sorry, no, not this one. The interior is
Color.
color. This one. Yeah, this one's color. And yeah, it's a perfect bound book. As you can see here, there's no, I mean, you can kind of see, I think, there's no like glue or anything there. So there's this one. This was from the, I believe, second year of our poet artist development program. This is a chapbook, poetry chapbook. This one was made by hand. This one has photos just like the other one, but this one is black and white. Also has some poetry, as you can see here. Has a full color, full bleed cover. This uses a cover stock paper on the cover, and it uses a just basic printer stock paper here. The dimensions of this one is what is it? 5.5 inches this way and 8.5 inches this way. This one is 5 inches this way, 8 inches this way. Which of these was the cheaper one to produce?
The larger.
The larger one? And again, you can put your answers in the chat.
Are they both in color?
This one is black and white interior, but color on
Okay.
the outside.
Okay, so I say that one's cheaper.
The black and white one, this one?
Yep.
Okay. Human shells. That's 2 votes for human shells. The smaller one, this one, Conchas y Café. All right. The black and white is cheaper, according to Carolyn. Anyone else? Any last thoughts?
I have a question,
Yes,
just
Doc.
in case. Is it the same amount of quantity that you made? Because sometimes when you make a larger bulk of quantity, you can get it cheaper.
These were the same quantity.
Oh, well, then I stick with the large one.
Okay. And what is the type of paper of the Conchas y Café? Good question. So this is your standard cover stock, same paper stock as this one. And on the inside, because this one is color, I did have to get a slightly thicker stock, but this is still considered, I think, 80 pound. So it's like a basic text stock. The larger one was cheaper. All right. It seems like I got most people's answers. Believe it or not, in the bigger scheme of things, this one, the smaller one, was cheaper. The Conchas y Café one was cheaper. This one was more expensive. Even though this one's staple bound, this one was handmade, hand produced, printed on inkjet But you know, because of all the time and effort that it took to make it by hand, to assemble it by hand, this one was more expensive.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. Last one. Now I'm taking you all way back. This one right here is one of the very first issues of Art Block. This one is no longer in print. This was a limited run. As you can see, the cover was originally handmade, hand collaged, hand illustrated. This one opens like this with folds. And when it's completely unfolded, it is 6 feet long. It is color printed on both sides. It is same size as the previous one, 8.5 by 5.5, which is go. So there's that one. And then this one is last year's issue of Art Block Zine. This one is printed on magazine stock paper. And oh yeah, this one, the pages are glued together, glued and folded together. This one, the binding on this one is your standard perfect binding. Again, magazine stock paper. So the cover is, I think, 90-pound paper. The interior is 80-pound paper. Yeah, it's very nice. This is printed in color. It has illustrations pretty much everywhere. Shout out to @Cartoon Distortion, Luis Blacayer, our author, or sorry, artist, cover artist for this one.
I would say the first one is cheaper because the economy was different compared to right now if you're trying to sell those.
Okay, adjusting for inflation.
Yes, I am.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. Which of these two is cheaper?
I say the one from last year.
Last year's is cheaper.
Mhm.
Okay. You're muted, Abraham.
So the one that you printed is one single page?
This one is multiple pages
Okay,
glued together.
so time and effort, are we counting for that?
Yeah.
So that one's more expensive.
This one's more expensive. Was it hand glued? Yes, this one's hand glued.
Unless you have child labor.
We don't talk about that, Abraham.
Yeah, last
Oh,
year's
shit.
was cheaper to make.
Last year's was cheaper to make. All right. I think I have most everyone's answers. Yes, it's yeah, y'all are right. Last year's was cheaper to make. All right. Now, to give y'all an idea of exactly how cheap some of these were to make in terms of just the production cost, not the actual time, right? The labor. This one cost me 25 cents each, right? Just for the materials. That's the printing. And I guess you could factor in also the ream of paper because I bought a ream of orange paper. So about 25 cents each. This one costs about $1 each. This paper is thicker, it's bigger. The ream of paper for this is quite a bit more expensive than a single ream of this paper. But then, you know, you factor in the production techniques used, you know, the cutting, the folding, and this also has perforations so that you can tear off a portion of it. This one was about $1 each to produce. This one is actually one of our most expensive Conchas y Café zines to date. This one we sell for $19.99, but the individual price of these is approximately $13. So this one is definitely a bit more expensive. Actually, no, this one is about $14 now. It's about $14 to print one single copy of these. This one, um, this one, it cost me approximately $15 each. So it's a little bit more expensive than the other one. And that's because I did all the printing myself. The cost of the inks themselves is really high. Then you factor in the paper. This cover paper, it's not super expensive, but you know, a ream of this, which I was able to reuse at least on another project. I mean, this was definitely a pretty expensive one to print. Given the number of pages also that the manuscript itself has in here, just this was like about $5 each at Office Depot at the time. Almost $6 actually. So yeah, this was pretty expensive to produce. And same print run. This one was very expensive to produce. This one, we were selling them at the time for $5 each, and each one of these was costing me $25 to produce. So not very viable, not very just feasible to keep in hand. I mean, I could have probably sold them for more, but at the time it was just that was our pricing structure for our zines. And yeah, ultimately I lived and learned and no longer did zines this way. This was the last time that we did an art blog zine in this format. These right here, these new issues of Art Block Zine, these using the printer that we are currently using right now cost approximately I want to say about $13 if I remember correctly. That's the average price for our current art block zines. Abraham?
Oh no, finish your thought. I'll add up to the end.
No, that's it.
Oh,
I mean, I just wanted to give you all an idea of what the actual
How
print.
much was the other one? That one's 13. How much was the other one?
The old one? This one? This one cost me almost
That was
25.
25.
Yeah, this was almost $25 each.
Oh, so then that one's more expensive.
Yeah. Oh yeah, way more expensive.
yeah. I worked for printers before, and I have done a lot of lab for the photo stuff. And the things that I found out is like, okay, you have a printer at home, let's say that, right? That printer is not going to be fast enough. If it is a regular printer, of course, it's different types of printers.
Mhm.
The ink on printers is super expensive. That's the thing. Another thing that people don't account when they buy a printer is that printers can go bad. They can get damaged. That's a cost that you have to absorb, meaning like reparations. And buying sometimes like printers somewhere else is sometimes cheaper because they have cheaper inks that they can use because they have contacts with the actual sellers of the inks, as well as the machines are faster, so they don't take too much time of the employees. And of course, like the machines are made for that.
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes, unless you are printing something that's special and it's gonna be valuably higher, then I say buy your own printer and be more clean, more specific, and you have more control of the prints.
Yeah. So depending on what type of product you're creating, you really do want to take into account like the cost of printing, the cost of packaging, the cost of the final production. There's a lot of different things that go into producing things like books specifically. To be very transparent with all of you, I'm going to show you our estimated print budget for your chapbooks. And, here you'll see that they say 120 pages. Remember that we tell you to keep your manuscripts at approximately a 60-page manuscript for a chapbook. When it's reformatted into the average 5x8 size, those 60 pages, especially if they're poetry, could double. So we need to be able to account for up to 120 pages in the final product. Now, the difference between black and white printing and color printing, if we go with the economy version of printing, you'll see that the price difference isn't super high, but when it does all total out, I mean, we're talking about like, what is this? Maybe $70 price difference almost, between the two options. And the part that I think people really forget is time, right? Time is a resource. All of us have to really account for the amount of time that we put into something. Not only did this particular zine from Art Block, the one that has the multiple folds, not only did that cost me physically almost $25 to print each one, there was also a lot of time that went into gluing each individual sheet and making sure that they were done correctly and folded correctly. And I mean, it was a monster of a project. Angie was around at that time, and I don't remember if Angie was there with us when we were assembling them, but I did have help. And
And
even
she's still
then,
here. Wow.
yeah,
Thanks, Angie.
yeah, Angie, Angie was part of that era of, Art Block Zine. And at the time, Angie was one of the mentees, in the Poet Artist Development Program. So, you know, it's yeah, it's been around for that long, just like Conchas y Café. But again, the unit cost, this is the average unit cost for the zines themselves or the chapbooks themselves. If we're talking about just this one size, right? It's about $8 each. Then we also have to factor in the shipping, right? Each one of them, if we were to buy them individually, it's $3.99. That price may have gone up now because at the beginning of this year, the post office increased their shipping costs. So their minimum is now about $4.40. Um, FedEx and UPS sometimes are a little bit cheaper. So this is still close to the average. But do keep in mind, this might have gone up this year or will go up this year. So the wholesale unit cost of an individual chapbook is approximately $12. That's about how much we allocate to each one of your chapbooks. And printing wise, for the first print run of 100, we are spending approximately $730. If your book is going to be in color, then it's almost $800 that we spend on the printing. And, then there's sales tax. We always have to pay sales tax. Even though we're a nonprofit, people confuse the fact that, being a nonprofit means no sales tax, no taxes, period. But no, we still pay sales taxes. And you, as a business owner, you will still pay sales taxes.
So
So
we
that
have to
is
become a religion.
even churches.
They
Churches
pay
pay
taxes since when? What?
yeah, sales taxes. Nobody is free of being taxed.
Hmm.
But yeah, tax on tax on tax. But the thing is that people really, really underestimate the time that it takes to make something. And even though I send your chapbooks and your manuscripts off to print with a professional printer, the amount of time that it takes to actually design your chapbooks is approximately 30 hours each. And the Distill Arts hourly rate for Distill Arts, to operate, we operate at approximately $280 an hour. Our budget is, never been honestly fulfilled to where we can actually charge that. So, in all honesty, these 30 hours for each one of your chapbooks, that's approximately how much time I donate to Distill Arts. This
Wow.
this amount I am donating to each one of you to develop your manuscripts, to design them and print them.
Wow.
I usually only get the funding to be able to cover the cost of the printing. So I'm not trying to um, make y'all feel bad, but this is a very real thing that all of you need to remember when you're designing your chapbooks. If you do this on your own later, like you really need to account for your time because it can be a lot. Designing something and doing it well does require a bit of investment in time. So And it is also really important to remember that the more complexity you add to a design, the more time and resources it will cost you in the long run. And this is the same whether you're creating a website, whether you're developing a zine or a chapbook. If you're going to be even doing a program, right? If you're going to have a program that has multiple phases or multiple sessions, you're adding complexity, and you are creating a more expensive uh, product, ultimately, product or service. There's a statue waiting for me. Thank you, Abraham.
I have a question, Luis.
Yes.
On the section where you say the wholesale print cost,
Mhm.
and you said the color one is $7.95, and then the
Yeah.
black and white is $2.70. Now, when you say color, are you talking about the outside part of the book that's sometimes in color, and then the rest is all black and white? Or are
No,
you
this is
saying
for
that
the
in
the
between?
interior.
Huh?
So this is for the interior. So it's the
Oh, the
the
interior.
cover and the interior, right? So this is a complete book that is color, and this is a
Color,
complete book
okay.
that is black and white. So yeah,
But
with a
because some
color.
of our books are complete black and white except for the outside.
Yeah, the cover will always be in color. That is something that at least we can you know establish now. So your covers will be in color. If you're printing like illustrations that are colored, then this is
Then it's in
approximately how
that
much money.
category, that section. Okay, got it. Thank you.
And this is also something to keep in mind, right? There's bulk discounts, which we did kind of talk a little bit about. For 100 units, we get a 20% bulk discount. So that's why this number is going to be actually lower than what it would cost if we bought them each individually. I mean, so it is a significant discount if you order in bulk. So
Yeah.
now, again, going back to the concepts of design thinking, you know, all of these things are going to play a factor when you're thinking about how you design your chapbooks, how you design your zines, if you're going to be doing this on your own in the future. So these things, again, aren't just a philosophical theory about how to approach, creating work that is, accessible to your community. It's also about, very practical things. How much money can you spend on printing t-shirts, right? How easy is it for you to, send away to a printer or design the logo or whatever the case might be, and are you creating things that people are going to want to buy on a regular basis? These are all questions that you kind of have to ask yourself, at some point when you begin to turn your creative practice into a business. Um, Books for the blind, that is where the money is. Yeah. I don't really know how much books in Braille cost.
I'm
Uh,
looking.
but there's also, other ways in which people with assistive technologies can access books. That's why with Distill Arts, at least, I always produce PDFs that have the accessibility feature turned on so that people that use assistive text technology to read when they're either visually impaired or have no ability to read on a tablet, and they use Braille, like at least those tools are functional with a lot of our PDFs. Now, design thinking applied, right? We're talking about design thinking as a philosophy, but also how you apply it in your own practice. It's not just, again, about, designing a logo, uh, or even a program or publication. This can be applied to even something as like global as your brand identity, right? And a brand identity is when you as a business owner start to craft the way in which you present your business, right? The way you present your practice as an artist. All of the core elements of a brand identity can be found in a style guide. This is useful if you end up hiring someone to do things like social media for you. If you decide that you want to work with a graphic designer, for example, to develop your flyers or your website, if you have a style guide that tells them these are the colors that I want you to use, and these will always be the colors for my particular logo or my brand, that's where it can be found in a style guide. The same goes with the fonts that you choose and the way that you format those fonts. The same goes for the aesthetic, the design aesthetic. It could be more traditional, more modern. It could be minimalist. It could be kind of all over the place and, be either post-punk or, as some people might call it, energetic. And even the tone. Some people just sound nice, right? In everything that they post. They sound like they're always happy. Some people are very snarky. Some people use sarcasm as a part of their brand. There's I'm trying to think off the top of my head which brand is very snarky. Um, there used to be a root beer called Barks root beer, for example. They usually were very snarky. Abe's brand. Yeah. Abraham?
Yeah, I was checking on a show the other time, and they were talking about insurances right now, like the boring
Mhm.
thing. They used to tell you how much insurance, how much it would cover you. And
Yeah.
then there was a thing that became really popular. It's basically mascots.
Yeah.
And one of them became super popular with Skako and became, I think, the second biggest company for insurances just because of the animal. And the animal has its own character, right? So it's really important.
Yeah. And all of those things, to remain consistent, especially if you're going to be, doing this for the long run, it helps to have a style guide. So, each element, usually you'll begin with color, right? The color that you choose for your logo, for example, or for your website, or even for maybe a zine that you're creating, right? If you're going to actually invest in printing and color, the colors that you choose will tell some type of story, right? They will have, you know, based on different cultural and social contexts, they'll have an impact on the individual. Typically, you'll be working either in cool tones or in warm tones. As you can see here, we listed them out. The warm is relatively going to be the yellow through to red, or red orange tones there. And then cool tones will typically be like the greens, the yellow greens, all the way through to like your purples or your red purples. The cool tones tend to signify things like, nature or calmness, relaxation. Blue and the blue adjacent tones tend to be more formal, and they're usually perceived as being more professional and in some areas even masculine. The purples tend to be more regal. That's just kind of like from a historical viewpoint, in especially European culture. Purple was considered to be the color of kings. So that's sort of stuck around for a long time. But it can also be associated with things that are mysterious or things that have kind of like an undertone of passion. Red, similar, right? It can be passion, but it can also be anger. It can also be, depending on the shade of it, it can be something that is a bit more mysterious or something that is very vibrant and maybe more related to food. Um, think of all of the different fast food brands out there. What colors do fast food brands, most of them use? Reds and yellows, to either mimic McDonald's, which was one of the very first large chains, or because, it's about the psychological impact that they have. Yellows are typically happy. It's a way of like, I don't know, signaling fun, right? And going out to eat can be a fun experience. So those are going to be the types of psychological impacts that different colors that you choose can have on the person that is part of your audience. So if you're developing a logo, for example, think about what is the type of vibe that you want your logo to give off. And yes, you'll have these slides afterwards. You can actually download the slide deck now off of Google Classroom too. But they will be uploaded later along with the video. Similarly to the way that colors have a psychological impact, the type of font that you choose also can have a particular impact. When looking at these fonts, and I'm going to enlarge this a little bit, what do these fonts say to you when you look at this first one as an example, Adele? What's the vibe that this one gives off? There's no right or wrong answer here, by the way. Now, if you were to compare it even to this one in
That
context,
one kind of screams out at you. The second one screams out at
Second one?
you.
yeah,
It's
In
like
what-
loud. It's loud.
Loud.
That's what
Okay.
like it's loud.
yeah,
Whereas the other one is it's pleasant.
Pleasant. Okay. Those are good descriptors. Thank you, Dr. Rosie.
Hmm.
Whoops. Let me see if I can zoom in on the bottom part. Here we go. Now, how about these? Adele makes you think of a term paper. Sure, I could see that. Has a little bit of that, like, professional, academic sort of vibe. I could see that.
It's easier to read the first.
Adele.
Just no this here the
This?
new one that you're showing us. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Courier. Sure.
Yeah, Carrier is kind of nice to read.
Abraham and I agree. Palatino is a very sexy font. That's for sure.
Okay, sexy boys.
If you were to compare these two, which would you use and in which context? What is Palatino good for? And
A
what is
romance.
Courier is similar to a typewriter font. Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely that. And Palatino,
Yes.
what is Palatino probably most used in? A Bible? Sure. A document that expresses authority, right? I mean, just like with color, some of these things will be based off of our cultural and social context. You could probably use Palatino in a book that is a collection of jokes. Um, that's possible. But if we were to really, out of these choices here, pick one that was maybe going to be used in a book of jokes, which would we go with? I would venture to guess that a lot of people would go with something like Hobo.
Yep.
But the problem with
Yes.
Hobo is kind of what Dr. Rosie said. It's kind of loud. And in
Yeah.
some cases, it might be difficult to read. But between the three options we have on screen, Courier, it's a little more relaxed, right?
Uh-huh.
It has a little bit of that, like, legibility that we're going for and, formalness, but not a super formal thing. I would say Courier is probably the one that has the personality for a joke book.
Hmm.
And these are things to keep in mind when you're selecting the types of fonts that you're going to use, whether that be for your website or even for a logo. Typography is way more than just a font, right? It refers to every way in which the written word is presented. Readability is going to be huge in this particular space, right? Fonts and colors have to work against dark backgrounds and light backgrounds. If you look at something like the Hobo font, that one turned white on a dark gray background, it works. Turned black on the dark gray background, probably not. None of them, to be honest with you. But, Adele might work a little bit better. It just depends, right? But it can be tiresome to read fonts against a color that it just doesn't work with, right? And we'll see that in a moment. Some fonts are also harder to read when they're written in uppercase or lowercase. So if your font is going to have like a funny looking uppercase and, it's against the color that is also difficult to read against, those could cause problems, right? Also, the size can change the way that a letter form looks. The letter form, the individual H, for example, here in Hobo, if we look at it, it's got like this funny shape. And if you were to make it bigger and bigger and bigger, the little gap that exists right here will make it, I think, a little more obvious that it's an H. But if it's too small, that H is going to look almost the same as an A, right? That's also something that you really need to be aware of when it comes to selecting a font for whatever the purpose might be. So, readability is very, very important. There's also the concept of kerning and leading. Kerning is the space in between your letters. If you look at the F, for example, right here, the two Fs together, they will form essentially a single character, right? In certain fonts, that type
Two
of
ends, two ends together sometimes look like an M.
right, right. And so sometimes the kerning needs to be adjusted. The leading is the space between lines. This is something that you can usually change within your basic word processors, but these are the types of things that designers really look at, especially typography. Typesetters, like that's their main jam. Typefaces are also, another way to create distinction and create visual hierarchy. Bolding or italics or regular font, those are different tools that you can use to create emphasis using, again, visual hierarchy. But overuse them and you just lose all purpose, right? So you have to use them strategically. Be very, very intentional. Going back to our quote, right? Be very intentional in the design choices you make. Now, legibility, again, is one of those main things that you need to be considering. And there's different types of fonts out there. There's Roman fonts and serif fonts, things like Times New Roman or Caslon or Palatino. They're considered Roman serif fonts. And then there's Gothic fonts, which have like no flourishes. They're very easy to read. They're very modern looking. The same goes with the like Optima or Arial, they're sans serif fonts. Slab fonts tend to be thicker, and that would be something that might mimic like old type forms, right? Old letter forms from very early in the printing world. So things like Rockwell or American Typewriter, Courier, those would be slab fonts. And then, of course, there's the ornamental fonts like Phosphate or Herculaneum. Those are fonts that, as the name says, they're ornamental, and you never want to use an ornamental font to lay out a long piece of text. They're really only designed for single words, or for like calling attention to something in a way that, is ultimately breaking the rules of typesetting for like longer prose pieces. And then there's the script fonts like Papyrus, which everybody loves to overuse, and things like Zapfino. And if you look at Zapfino here, I mean, this one is very difficult to read, especially if you think about using Zapfino for a lot longer pieces of writing, right? Sometimes it's just uppercase, yeah. So yeah, every font has a personality and an appropriate use. Be aware of that when you're thinking about your brand's voice, right? It's also good to pair complementary fonts. That does create visual hierarchy again, and it makes your designs kind of stand out a bit. So it's good to pair fonts, but never more than two, I would say. Two is a good number for you to be able to have a variety of the typefaces, like bolds, italics, and the regulars. You can still work within those, and that could be your combination. Or if you have two different types of fonts with multiple typefaces, sometimes that can work. But again, use them sparingly. And absolutely never use ornamental fonts or script fonts for longer text elements. They really are just decorative. And again, going back to design thinking, think about desirability, what makes things look nice. Everything looks nice from a kind of like personal standpoint, to a larger social, cultural standpoint based on some of these things here. Visual hierarchy. If things are helping the reader, kind of move across the page in a way that makes sense to them, that's what makes it easier, more accessible, therefore more desirable, right? You want to lead the movement of your audience's eyes. Also, keep the font selection simple and consistent. If you're using a font that's for a header, like a poetry title, a title for a poem, then continue using that particular font for your titles. And everything in the body, try and stay consistent and use just that one font for the body. The color palette thing, again, part of what makes things accessible. People are colorblind. People are going to sometimes invert the colors on their screens if they're interacting with your work through some sort of digital device. Having complementary colors that work with each other also creates a sense of, unity and calm. And that's something that you want to keep in mind as you're selecting the types of colors you want for either a logo or especially for a website. And again, go back to the idea of legibility and readability. You want to use colors that contrast well with each other. And then there's also the idea of a curvilinear element or a rectilinear element. Basically curves and straight lines, right? Sharper lines usually make people think of sharp objects, but they can also help people feel more stable. They can also feel like they can, make a difference in a sense. If you're talking about arrows, arrows usually indicate action. Sometimes, like a jagged line can also symbolize aggression. If that's not your vibe, you may want to consider using more curves in your design. Curves usually invoke the idea of softness. Waves, undulating, things can create the sense of motion in a calm way, of course. And, circles usually are kind of seen as being passive, so those are ways in which you can create a vibe with the type of elements that you use in your designs. Logos can do a lot for you. A good logo is going to be simple and original. If you look at the logos here that I created for Distill Arts, in all honesty, this was not the very first logo that I created for Distill Arts, and this badge was not the first badge that I created for Distill Arts. But the colors that I chose were for a specific reason. The greenish, bluish, teal color here for the Distill Arts part, the DSTL, and the background of the badge. I chose that color because I wanted it to feel welcoming. And the orange color, that orange yellow, is, historically, culturally speaking, the color of creativity, right? So we're an arts organization. That's really what the thinking was when I created the logo. And of course, the badge needed to be something that I could use whenever this, what we call word mark, was not available as a potential use. When it came to Art Block Zine, because of the personality that Art Block had and continues to have, over the course of its life, we have changed the logo little by little, and this is now the current logo for the masthead of the zine itself. And to indicate that it is a Distill Arts publication, I created, a matching badge, right? All of these things, at least I hope, look simple and have a sense of originality to them. They serve the purpose of describing what it is that it's meant to be associated with, in enough of a way where people will make the associations that I want them to make. As you're developing your logos, it's important to remember that originality, is kind of difficult. But as long as you can find something that doesn't completely mimic your competition, that's where I think you can kind of work within some of the things that people expect. It's also good to avoid cliches. So as you develop a logo, even if it's like just your name, do a web search to see if other people are using it or if they are using something that, might be within the vibe or the vein of what you want to accomplish, and then work within some of those parameters, right? But as much as possible, keep it simple. A good logo is also going to be versatile and timeless. This is obviously, for those of you that have been around long enough, not the first logo that Instagram created. But the one thing that makes this logo in particular a versatile logo is that it's not so much about the colors as it is about the shape, right? This little shape right here that shows us what used to be a camera in the original logo. As they developed their logo, they were able to perpetually modify it so that it became a flat design that still more or less retains the concept that they were trying to convey, which is a camera, a recording device. So, avoid trends. That's what helps you kind of stay timeless and versatile. Um, it's also sometimes a good idea to have both a word mark and a symbol. In some cases, the symbol, like the book inside of the circle here, that's what's used to indicate the library. But, in other cases, it's really important that we see exactly what, the thing is meant to be. But, these are just some good tips for you to consider as you develop your own brand. And yeah, I feel like I'm going through this pretty fast, but we're almost done. This, of course, is your quote unquote homework. I encourage y'all to think about some of these principles that we talked about, right? Design thinking is, again, not just a approach to creating designs, but it's also in some ways a philosophical idea. And this might help you as you develop and prepare the content that you are going to be creating, not just for your audience, but for yourself as a business owner. And it's good to put into practice some of these concepts using either Adobe Express or Canva. Both of those apps and websites allow you to create logos directly in the app itself. And, if you play around with them, again, these apps are free and you can use them on any device, whether that be, a computer or tablet or smartphone. They can help you really develop something that may or may not become your permanent logo. So, um, you know, take the time to do this now, just like with all the other planning things that we've discussed. Really think about what is the intended purpose of your designs? What is the intended purpose of the services and the other products that you're going to be creating? And approach them with the design thinking principles, right? And if you have any questions, of course, I'll stay on here for a couple of minutes to answer any additional questions. We are over our time, but for anybody watching on Instagram Live or on YouTube later, you can, of course, reach out directly to us if you have questions or if you'd like a copy of the slide deck. For those of you, of course, in the program, our mentees, we'll see you all next week, and you can ask your questions at any point. I'm more than happy to discuss these during our office hours. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end. For the purpose of the recording and for our Instagram Live peoples, I hope y'all enjoyed it. And I really do look forward to seeing good design, effective design in our future. And for our folks here,